their weapons, and in Croatia they reintroduced conscription. What direction do these statements, plans, and steps point to? I'm also asking Prime Minister Viktor Orbán about this.
Good morning. Good morning. I greet the listeners.
Where is Europe heading in your opinion, based on the news just listed?
To the news you listed, I would add one more thing. World powers are presenting new weapons systems, and these are increasingly effective weapons. So we are noticeably at the starting point of an arms race, a spiral, and everyone is talking about increasing military budgets by orders of magnitude. The human brain is such that when it seeks reference points to understand a situation or wants to deduce the future from present events, it turns to the past, looking for patterns. I also work this way. When a matter comes up, I compare it. If I have a dossier, I know how it was before. I think this is true on a large scale too, not just for those working in organizational management, but also for those dealing with understanding the world. There are two analogies I see in international analyses and studies from which they try to understand the current situation. One reaches back to World War II, the other to the First. Some say we are where we were in '38. Hitler is advancing. The European great powers don't stop him in time, but rather appease. And such successive small appeasements and peace agreements eventually lead us to a huge Nazi Germany, from which World War II erupts. Some interpret the current conflict this way. I argue with this, but this is uninteresting from the listener's perspective. The other, which is closer to my interpretation, is World War I, where essentially nobody wanted a great war. Everyone wanted something, but nobody wanted a great European war. And in the end, European leaders stumbled into a situation from which there was no way back. I see such an atmosphere at this moment. I feel that European leaders don't perceive that they're playing with fire, and don't perceive that one decision after another. New weapons systems, more money to Ukraine, more soldiers, conscription, and so on. These are steps that can combine into such a dangerous mixture, such explosive material, that will suddenly explode. So I think Europe today is heading toward war. Such statements are being made that you wouldn't believe at high-level consultations. A great power says we will rearm Germany, for example. We will be Europe's largest army, most soldiers, most weapons, largest military industry. Or Ursula von der Leyen says we must be ready for war within 5 years. These are all very, very dangerous statements, and those who say them don't think through that these can be self-fulfilling prophecies. If you put a gun on the table, the old theatrical rule, sooner or later something will happen with it. It might go off. So I feel that Europe today is staggering, stumbling toward a situation that represents an increasingly direct threat of war. And that's why I say to Hungarians, to myself, to the government, to the people, to you, to everyone, that we must now prepare ourselves so that even in the event of an unfavorable turn of events, we will not be drawn in. So while everyone unconsciously drifts toward war, we must very consciously dig in our heels and remain on the side of peace. We must announce in advance that we will stay out of every small decision now, lest we find ourselves in the middle of a war outbreak in the end. That's why it's crucial for Hungary's future that the country has an anti-war and pro-peace government, and that people understand, join in, they too express their will that they don't want to stagger together with European countries toward a dangerous situation, but rather stay out of this in due time. I think this is the key to the situation.
Yes, well, before World War I, the dominoes really did fall continuously. But how much reality is there now in the current situation to even talk about peace, organize a peace camp, which was, for example, the purpose of the Rome trip?
Well, the situation is much better than it was before. Today, the Europeans want war. They openly talk about needing to prepare for a war they will wage with Russia. We've had such experiences, not one, not two. We don't recommend it to them, but they're big dogs. We're smaller. We're happy if we can influence our own fate, let alone think we'll change the intentions of the great powers. Of course, we're available. Even if we're small, our brain capacity is fine, so we have thoughts, things to say, proposals. But we don't have sufficient strength to force great powers to follow more rational behavior. But our duty is to reveal these depths we're discussing now and force everyone to look into the well, so whoever talks about war must reckon with the possible consequences of their words. But the situation was worse a year ago, because then the Americans were also on the side of war. Now only the Europeans are, and the Ukrainians. The Americans are on the side of peace, and the Russians have also reached the point where, under certain, now-known conditions, they're willing to accept peace or a ceasefire. The Ukrainians are still fighting a defensive war. They don't want to make peace, which is understandable, but extremely unfavorable for us, that they've lost 22% of their territory and can't accept this, and therefore continue the war instead. And the Europeans are financing this war. Although it's clearly visible, this war has no solution. This war doesn't reach a resting point on the front line. So whoever believes they can achieve military victory in this war, if the Russians believed they could trample Ukraine, or the Ukrainians believe they can drive the Russians out of territory they've already occupied, those who think this, and therefore must continue the war, I think they're mistaken. This will result in a frozen situation, a frozen front line, where wars continuously take place. Lots of lives are lost, it consumes enormous money, and the debate about this can drag one or another European country into this conflict as well. We are in a very dangerous situation.
Yes, but the European Union says it wants peace. It just wants to achieve this through supporting Ukraine.
They're not telling the truth.
But how long can the European Union sustain this support?
Whoever wants peace makes peace. So let's leave the fairy tales. We're not children. We're past the point where someone stands up, says something, and does the opposite, and we don't notice or pretend there's no contradiction. Because today only one great power wants peace. That's the United States of America. If we wanted peace, we would support the President of the United States. But we don't support him. Instead, we say all sorts of things, and then do the opposite of what would help the American president make peace. So today, the most important obstacle to the American president's peace attempts, peacemaking efforts, is the very group of European countries that calls itself the coalition of the willing. If they're willing to send others to war to die, because of course they're not going yet, they're just arming. So today there is a fundamental contradiction between the United States and the European Union regarding how to end the war. But we don't admit this. We don't want to draw a transatlantic conflict before us. We don't want to draw you, citizens, into the force field of such a confrontation either. But rather we say everyone calm down. In reality, Westerners, Europeans, and Americans essentially want the same thing. But this is not true.
How long can Europe's economy sustain supporting Ukraine? Because Zelensky said this week he called on European leaders to provide stable financial support to Ukraine for a while longer.
The first and most important thesis statement, I think, is that whoever supports Ukraine supports the war. So whoever supports Ukraine today supports a Ukraine that wants to continue the war, meaning they support the war itself. And since war needs money, whoever supports Ukraine and thus the war also supports tax increases and money extraction from national governments, because Brussels has no money. There's no such thing as Brussels money. This is a good fairy tale that the European Union has sold in many countries. Less sharp-minded peoples might even believe it. But in reality, Brussels has no money of its own. It's trying to levy its own taxes. This is a negligible amount. Brussels money consists of member states sending that money to Brussels. So when Brussels takes out a loan for the Union, we stand behind it as the ultimate collateral as member states. So when Brussels sends money to Ukraine, it's always our money too. Not just ours, but ours too. The next 7-year budget, whose draft is on the table, already sends more than 20% of the budget pooled by member states directly or through hidden channels to Ukraine. While the European economy is in huge trouble, so I think there's no money anymore. There's no money in the European Union. We want to finance a war. We want to give money to the Ukrainians. We want to keep the Ukrainian army in battle readiness, while we don't have a single penny for this. Either it must be taken from member states. I think that's why they talk about pension tax, why they want to raise taxes, because they know more money will have to be paid into Brussels. Or Brussels must collectively take out even larger loans, which then has consequences. The black soup comes, because those have to be repaid. Another large item of the next 7-year budget, beyond the money intended for Ukrainians, is the interest burden of previously taken loans. And this keeps growing and growing and in the end crushes us, as if a classic debt crisis emerges from this.
With such Brussels determination, what is the domestic signature collection against war plans worth?
Well, we must strive for the pro-peace Americans to emerge victorious from this debate, the debate between Americans and Europeans. This is a strange statement. We didn't learn this. We haven't gotten used to this. In the past 60, 70 years, the Americans were usually the hawks and more pro-war, while the Europeans were more cautious. We have 2 world wars behind us on our continent. We mustn't rush into this. Now this has reversed. There is a president in America, thank God, who wants peace, and the Europeans are the hawks. So it's in our interest for this debate to be decided in favor of the American president, for the peacemaking intention to prevail. The Vatican continues to be, I went there so I can say from personal experience, the Vatican continues to be the spiritual center of peace. Such an intention radiates from there. This is very important, I think. In such difficult situations, decision-makers need spiritual, moral reinforcement. That's why the meeting with the Holy Father was a great help, who reinforced us that we're on the right track, to put it in worldly terms, that we must remain on the path of peace. It's good if Christians are united in this, and election results keep coming from Europe, where pro-peace governments come in place of pro-war governments. This happened in Slovakia, now it happened in the Czech Republic, and I expect similar developments.
Next Friday, you'll also meet with Donald Trump and partly coordinate on peace in the White House. Could we get closer to peace in a week, or at least to a Budapest peace summit?
I think we can get closer. We've been working on this meeting for a long time. It's not just jumping together, because I'd jump, but the president doesn't have time. So if we meet once, it has to be serious. So it's not just about me meeting with the President of the United States, which of course has significance from our perspective. The head of the Hungarian government meets with the American president. But we're practically making a Hungarian day in Washington. So economic leaders, several ministers, leaders of important state organs, the national security chief, and so on. So we're going with a large delegation, everyone has their partners, and a complete review, facelift of American-Hungarian relations is happening. At the highest level negotiations, one important element is peace. But for us Hungarians, there are other important elements too, because we've been negotiating economic matters for many months. I feel that if we don't mess it up there, and why would we can finalize an American-Hungarian economic cooperation package.
What can the Hungarian economy profit from this? Because there is a small shadow cast over this. This is the question of energy.
Well, we'll have to clarify that, but I've been working for months, so Americans can imagine the European or Central European map. It's not their business because they have their own map, where the United States is in the center. By the way, there are 3 world maps in my office. I don't want to bore you with this. I haven't lost my mind, because there's one Earth, one globe, but it can be viewed in different ways. There's a map where Europe is in the center, viewing the world from there. And there's the map in my office that's also in the American president's office, where the United States is located at the center of the world, and from there the globe is outlined. And there's a third that the Chinese president looks at every day, where they are in the center. And we're not big enough. We often have to adapt. We have to see the world through others' eyes too. Now, if we look at it this way, then I have to say that naturally bilateral relations are most important. So for us, for Hungarians, what's most important is that tangible benefits arise for Hungarian people from American-Hungarian relations. I say to you in parentheses that while Americans are just going home and taking back, calling back, pulling back their companies from various parts of the world, meanwhile American investments keep arriving in Hungary, one after another. These aren't blown in by the wind. They come here based on agreements. And in the current economic cooperation package, we also have requests and proposals for new American investments that would come to Hungary. But the prerequisite for this is what you say, that we settle the energy question, because for an investor to decide on a long-term investment, they must see the development of one important cost of production, which is the price of energy. And I have to convince the Americans, because they can't imagine what it's like when a country has no sea, because they do. If you look at the map, you see waters washing their shores from left and right. In contrast, Hungary is a landlocked country. We have no sea. Direct sea transport is not possible. We are at the mercy of those transport routes through which energy can arrive in Hungary. These are mainly pipelines. There are electric lines too, that's another matter, and we have to adapt to this pipeline system, or we won't have energy. And we have to make the Americans understand this strange situation, that they can't know the difficulties of it, if we want them to allow exceptions from American sanctions hitting Russia. But we're not completely alone because, although it slipped by in the Hungarian press, I'm surprised myself, but I saw an intelligence report, or maybe even public news, that the Germans, who have sea coasts, are requesting an exception from American sanctions for one of their refineries. While I remember them pulling at our coattails, pulling at our jacket tails to get off Russian energy, and now it turns out that when everyone has to get off, the Germans immediately request an exception. But this didn't prevent them from pulling at our jacket tails until now. So I just want to say that every state has the right to defend itself at the national economy level against such a sanctions system. Even Germany, which has access to the sea. Well then, shouldn't we, who have no sea, have this right?